Yes, would you ask Mr. Evans to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Evans, ready to carry on?
I am, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Evans, can I ask you please next to go to CEL 409531? This is an email sent by Jamie Hayes to you, among other people, on the 30th of May 2014. Jamie Hayes is a technical services officer. And he says, "Hi all, the first article is interesting for those of us involved in the 18-metre project." Now, just before I show you what he's sending you, the 18-metre project was at that time a marketing or presentational initiative to access the 18-metre market, wasn't it?
Yes.
And to drive a Celotex product into that market, yes?
Yes, to have a solution in that market, yes.
To have a solution in that market. When you say solution, do you mean a product?
A product, yes.
Yeah. And then if we, and by this stage, end of May, I think you'd become a head of marketing, hadn't you?
1st of May 2013, yes.
So this was 30 days into that role. Can we look at what he attaches at the bottom of page 1 and over to page 2? It's something called Redbook Live. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I've heard of Redbook Live, yes.
Right, what is it, or what was it?
It's a publication, I believe, produced by the BRE, where there are products and systems related to applications that are listed.
And if we go to page 2, please, there's an article within it which has a caption, as you can see at the top of the page: "The latest high-profile fire in the UAE has reaffirmed the need for properly approved, installed and maintained cladding systems in high-rise buildings." And that's a quotation from Debbie Smith, Dr. Debbie Smith, OBE, Director of Fire Sciences and Building Products, BRE Global. When this came, did you read this document, and in particular that part of it?
I don't recall either.
Were you aware in general terms of the importance of complying with the building regulations?
Yes.
Were you aware of the fire in the UAE that's been referred to here in this part of this document?
I don't believe so.
Do you remember that there was significant coverage of fires in Dubai in 2015 and 2016 in industry publications?
Not that I recall, no.
Were you aware in general terms of the fires in 2012, 2013 in the UAE involving cladding on the exterior of high-rise buildings?
I don't believe so at the time.
Does that tell us that you weren't aware that those external cladding fires had involved ACM panels?
I wouldn't have known that detail, no.
Right. In general terms, did you have any understanding at the time that ACM panels were being used which involved or included the use of a core comprised of polyethylene?
I don't believe the term ACM would have meant a huge amount to me, no.
In 2013?
No.
What about later?
Even later, I don't believe it was a term that I saw a lot.
Was it not?
ACM, I know, with the benefit of having seen documents, aluminium, etc., but I didn't have a huge amount of detail or knowledge about ACM and the different types of ACM.
Leaving aside the question for the moment of ACM, were you aware in general terms that installing combustible rain screen panels as cladding on the exterior of a building was likely to increase the risk of fire spread over the surface, the external surface of the building?
Can you say that again, please?
Were you aware at the time that installing combustible rain screen panels as cladding material on the exterior of a building was likely to increase the risk of fire spread over the exterior surface of the building?
I was aware that there was different types of cladding panels that needed to make sure that that didn't happen, but I wouldn't have known the technical detail to what that meant or what they were.
Right. Can I turn to the topic of John Roper and his role in the above 18-metre project? Mr. Roper joined Celotex in 2012, didn't he?
Yes.
And like you, he had a degree in business management,
Yes.
but no technical qualifications, as he's told the inquiry.
No, he
right.
joined straight from university, I believe.
Indeed, with no technical qualifications.
No.
And as you say in your statement, we don't need to turn it up, it's paragraph 17 on page 5, you say it was his first job as a graduate fresh out of university.
Yes,
Yes. And you, I think, were his line manager.
I was.
And you were his line manager when he came into Celotex?
Yes,
And throughout his time there, at least until October 2014, isn't that right?
John left the marketing department to join the sales team around that time.
And then Debbie Berger took over from him.
And Debbie Berger, there was a kind of a phased handover. So whether it was fully in October, I don't know. But
Right.
yeah,
And until you became head of marketing in May 2013, was he the only person you were line managing?
yes,
Did your promotion to head of marketing in May 2013 make any difference to the degree to which you supervised him?
it would have meant that I was then managing another function of the marketing department, the marketing communications. So yes, my attention would, from a line management perspective, I would have been line managing more people.
But did that, the fact that you were managing more people, did that make any difference to the degree of supervision which you exercised over Mr. Roper's work?
Not that I recall, no.
No. Okay. Can we go to your statement, please, at page 15 and go to paragraph 54? You say there, as the effective manager of the project, that's with a capital P, just for those looking at that statement for the first time, that's the above 18-metre project, is it?
Yes,
You say it was Mr. Roper's role to lead it and do the day-to-day work on it. Did you consider that and then you go on, Mr. Hayes' role was to provide some technical expertise when needed. Did you consider that Mr. Roper was adequately experienced, suitably old, and technically qualified to lead a project of this importance, the above 18-metre market project?
I don't believe I considered it, no.
You didn't consider it?
Only on the basis that there was other people across the Celotex business that could support in the same way that I had received support when I was in a similar position to John Roper, that would give him the required technical knowledge and other knowledge that he would need to do to support the role in effectively managing the project.
When did you give Mr. Roper the role of manager of the project?
I can't be 100% certain, but I believe it would have been towards the end of, at some point in early 2013 maybe. I've seen something where John's KPIs were, key performance indicators, had this project within them, and they were dated January 13th.
They were, and we'll come to that document
Okay.
in due course, Mr. Evans.
So
Certainly
about
by
that time.
January 2013.
Yes.
So it would have been before then, of course, but you can't remember precisely when. When you appointed Mr. Roper the effective manager of the above 18-metre project, did you consider whether he was the most suitable, experienced, technically qualified person to run a project of that importance?
I think the decision was more based around the product managers were primarily the people that ran projects in the same way that I had experienced, and therefore it was the natural thing for John to get involved in.
Why did you pick him?
Well, if it was a product manager, he was the only product manager in the business.
I see. Did you not have second thoughts, given his youth and inexperience?
On the basis of the knowledge I knew that John would have around the business in helping them, then no.
You mean, given the knowledge given that you knew that Mr. Roper would have plenty of help if he needed it from those around you?
Yes.
That's what you mean in
Yes,
the
I
last
do.
answer, is it? To be clear. Right. You then go on in paragraph 54 to say, Mr. Hayes' role was to provide some technical expertise when needed. Did you consider that Jamie Hayes had technical expertise?
I'm not sure I considered it. I worked with Jamie or knew of Jamie working for longer in the business as almost Rob Warren's sort of second in command in the technical centre. So I would have had no doubt that Jamie had that technical knowledge to support John.
He had no technical qualifications himself, did he?
I don't know. I don't believe so.
No. Now, would it be fair to say that certainly up to October 2014, when he left to go to the sales department, you effectively micromanaged Mr. Roper's work?
No, I wouldn't say micromanaged.
You were aware of everything he was doing and closely supervised it?
I was aware of what John's workload was, in the same way I was aware of other people in the team's workload, but I wouldn't describe myself as micromanaging, no.
Not in the sense of doing his work for him, but when I use the word micromanage, it's a word that's used by other witnesses of your attitude to supervising him. You don't agree with that, is that right?
Not based on my definition of micromanaging, no. I liked to know I was new to being a head of marketing, so maybe compared to other managers' style, maybe I was closer to certain parts of different people's roles, but I wouldn't describe that as micromanaging, no.
Would you say that you supervised Mr. Roper's work on the above 80-metre project closely?
I had a general understanding of what John was doing and knew that he had support around him with the likes of Jamie to help him,
Yeah.
and others.
There's not quite an answer to my question. I'd press you a little. Would you say that you supervised Mr. Roll's work on the above 80-metre project closely? Did you follow what he was doing closely?
Yes, I do. I believe I did.
Yes. I mean, you can't, sitting there, recall an area of work or thing he did or project he ran without you knowing about it, for example.
No, oh no.
No. And he would periodically update you.
Yes, he would update me, if whether that was through a sit-down
Yeah.
review or informally.
Yes. And you were copied in on all the emails, or most of the emails that he would have sent or received in relation to the above 18-metre project.
I don't know whether I was copied in on what percentage. I don't know how many he would have sent, but I know I've been copied in on quite a lot based on what I've had to review. Yes.
Yeah. Can we look at CEL 402900, please? This is the document I think you referred to a few moments ago in your evidence. It's entitled Objectives KPIs for 2013, and the date is at the bottom left-hand corner, PE January 2013. Did you draft this document?
Yes.
In January 2013?
I don't know whether it was done in 2013, but on the basis it says 2013, and generally we issued KPIs for our team at the start of the calendar year, then yes.
And you can see as objective number 4, implementation of BIM into Celotex specification service offering. What was that?
That was Celotex having its products suitable for what's called building information modelling.
Right. And then if you look at item 5, objective number 5, accreditation for FR 5000 for use in above 18-metre applications. And that was to be achieved by December 2013. And the measure there was to test, report and launched to sales team. So does that tell us that at the beginning of 2013, your objective or KPI was to get FR 5000 accredited for above 18-metre applications and launched and out to the sales team by the end of the year?
Yes.
Yeah. And that would give a 20% weighting in the KPIs for individual salespeople.
No, it would mean that John would have achieved 20% of his KPI target, yes.
Right. Now, that leads to my next question. Were these objectives and KPIs solely for John Roper, or were they for other people too?
No, looking at them all, everybody in the team and everybody in the business would have had their own objectives and KPIs.
And were these for John Roper?
Yes.
And only him?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Can we understand the weighting? The weighting, as you can see, is divided into 6 parts, different percentages, arriving at 100%. If you hit 100%, what would happen?
So you would achieve 100% of your KPI target, which was also linked to the business's financial bonus scheme that they ran.
Right, so you got a bonus over and above your salary if you hit 100%.
You didn't have to hit 100% to achieve the bonus.
Right. What if you hit 30%?
I don't know. I don't think anybody in the team ever hit 30%. So let's say there was the way it used to work is that a certain amount of percentage of salary was assigned to everybody for hitting their targets. So if they achieved 100% of their target, they received 100% of the bonus. So to answer your question, they would have received 30% of their bonus.
I see. So accreditation for our FR5000 was to John Roper worth 20% of the potential bonus.
Yes.
And what was the proportion in 2013 of the bonus to the salary? John Roper's bonus to John Roper's salary?
At that time, the number changed slightly, but on average, the bonus, I think, paid about 10% per year.
I see. So succeeding on accreditation under item 5 would give him 20% of 10% of his salary?
Yes.
Were there any consequences for failing to meet these targets, other than not getting the percentage of the bonus?
Not that I ever experienced, no.
Right. Can we then look a little bit more closely at the research done for the 18-metre project? Can we go to CEL 401340, please? This is a document called Above 18-metre Action Plan. And if you look at the footer on the first page, and we'll have to flick up to that, in the bottom right-hand corner it says, prepared by JR, March 2013. Did you have any input into this document?
I don't believe so.
And the JR there is John Roper?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you ask him to prepare it?
I don't know.
You don't know. Would he have prepared this document without your asking him to do so?
Based on his experience at the time, unlikely, no.
Right. And we can see under findings in the second sentence there, between August 12 and January 13, Celotex recorded lost opportunity from not having above 18 metres of 70,000 square metres. Now, that's something that we saw from the spreadsheet this morning, isn't it?
Yes.
It is one of two gaps in which we cannot compete with Cooltherm products. Only Kingspan K15 and Extratherm's Safe R Market that they've achieved above 18 metres fire accreditation. Both are in accordance with BS 8414 Part 1 onto a masonry wall. So the gap, one gap was the Kingspan Cooltherm gap. What was the other gap? Do you remember?
I'm trying to think of the... No, I don't recall.
Either way, is it fair to say that this document, when produced to you by John Roper in March 2013, identified to you that the above 18-metre market was seen as a significant commercial opportunity for Celotex?
Yes.
Yes, and indeed that is why you tasked him with the accreditation of FR5000.
Yes, it was a gap that Celotex had in its product range, and the launch of the 5000 range, the strategy of the company was to make sure that we had products that could compete with Kingspan Cooltherm.
Well, you say the launch of the 5000 range, that already existed, didn't it?
Yes, but when we launched that range, there was some applications which we didn't compete with.
And one of which was above 18 metres.
Yes, and I've just remembered, I believe the second one was the plasterboard laminates.
Right.
K17 and K18.
Okay. Now, why have you just remembered that?
Because I've been thinking about the different Cooltherm products that were in the range.
Right, there's nothing in this document that...
No, it's my knowledge.
...jumps out at you on that issue. Right. I want to ask you some questions now about SOTEC. Can we go to CEL 401851, please? This is an email run from June 2013, and it starts at the top with an email from Jonathan Roper to you, and the subject is re Paul Tollervey. And I'd like just to look at that email, and it says in that email there, in the second paragraph, We'll start to put together a process map. Had a conversation with the guy I met at the Reba event from Celotex Optima this morning. Seems to have a huge amount of experience testing to part 1 and part 2. Interestingly, they've only tested using Rockwool Duo slab, as when originally using K15 in their system, the test failed twice. They then reverted to Rockwool and passed, but warned that PIR isn't the easiest of materials to fire test. He suggested IFC, CX and Celotex arrange a meet. Celotex definitely seemed valuable, and in particular their MD, John, who stayed down at Watford for 2 weeks straight, ensuring every detail of the structure was put together correctly. Did you have any further discussion with Mr. Roper about the failed K15 tests following receipt from him of this email in June 2013?
Not that I recall, no.
Did you ask him what he meant by PIR isn't the easiest of materials to fire test, as we see there?
I don't believe so, no.
Did you understand, or did you not understand from this email, that you would have difficulty designing a system which would meet the BR 135 criteria using PIR?
I don't recall when I read this email, what my thinking was. I know that John was on a market research, market scoping exercise, and there seemed to be other people that he was able to meet, IFC and Celotex, for example, that would be able to take that knowledge further.
Did you know that Mr. Roper then did meet Celotex later in the month, later in June 2013?
I know he met with Celotex. I wouldn't recall exactly when that was.
Okay, let's have a look at CEL 401863, please. These are notes of his meeting with Celotex on the 22nd of June 2013. Do you remember seeing these notes? Did he send you these notes?
I believe he did, yes.
Yeah. And if we go halfway down the page, we can see that it says Celotex and BS 8414, parts 1 and 2. It says there, both systems incorporated Rockwool insulation and AIM fire barriers. Part 2 testing provisionally used K15 as the insulation forced upon by Metsec, who built the steel frame. 15 minutes testing, BRE extinguished the chamber due to fire being at the 9-metre level using K15. Celotex reverted to Rockwool and passed. Aluminium railing system and cladding panels found to melt and allow fire into cavity. Outer face resistant to fire and tolerance of fire barriers proven to be crucial. Now, you were told here, clearly, that the success of the test is often dependent on the cladding material that's used. You could see that.
Yes.
And specifically in relation to cladding materials, he says, and I've read it to you, that aluminium railing system and cladding panels found to melt and allow fire to enter cavity. Did you take from that this made it clear that it was unlikely that it would be possible to test PIR, RS5000 as it became, with aluminium cladding in the test rig?
I don't recall having any thinking about aluminium and cladding panels. I think what was developing over this time is a knowledge that you need. Not all rain screen cladding systems will pass BS 8414. Right.
And it would depend upon the individual components of the particular rig being tested.
There was component parts, yes.
Yes, and then if you look a little bit lower down, it says K15 BBA certification and literature as a heading, and the note starts, astonished as to how K15 is used so widely based on testing involving a cement particle board as the outer face to represent a typical cladding panel, because and it goes on, identified that K-span used Promoseal fire barriers, etc. Just pausing there, it was both John Roper and the Eggingtons from Celotex who expressed the astonishment about how K15 could be used so widely, given what they tested. Did you know that, or did you take that from this note?
I don't know where the astonished, didn't know who was astonished from, wouldn't have known who was astonished from that note, whether it was a point made from John or from other people in the meeting.
Right. In your statement, page 17, you deal with this note at paragraph 64, and you say, the notice also recorded astonished, etc., and then you quote extensively from the note. And then you say, I do not recall what my thoughts were on reading this at the time. I assume now that the astonishment was on the part of Celotex individuals rather than Mr. Roper. I do recall developing belief emerging around this time that what Kingspan had tested was not necessarily representative of what was actually being used in the market, and also that Kingspan had not been particularly clear in its literature about the system it had tested for BS 8414 Part 1. I recall the K15 specification literature, which from memory did not make prominent the system details which Kingspan had tested to. Now, is it at that point in time that we can trace your understanding that Kingspan's K15 had passed the BS 8414 test with one kind of rig, but was being used in a much wider series or set of applications?
I think that's what we're beginning to understand. What I was beginning to understand from this document. Yes.
And did you also take from this document that Kingspan literature that you had read had the potential to mislead people into believing that Kingspan K15 could be used in systems that had not in fact been tested?
I remember the K15 specification literature. It wasn't very easy to see the system that had been tested.
As you say in your statement, did you also, I'm going to press you on the question I asked you, did you also think that the Kingspan literature had the potential to mislead people into believing that K15 could be used in systems which hadn't actually undergone the BS 8414 test that had passed?
On the basis that it was difficult to see the system that Kingspan had tested, then yes.
Yes. Were you not concerned that Kingspan had not managed to achieve a pass with a system that was representative, given the potential similarities between FR 5000 as it was and Kingspan K15?
I think at the time when I was thinking about Kingspan as the business that they were, the size of the business, it made me think there must have been other ways that they were able to get the product certified or allowed to be used on buildings.
And were you curious to know how they'd done it?
At the time, I would have been curious, yes.
Well, I'm talking about at the time.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, it's right to think that Mr. Roper subsequently sent you a project plan and business case. Do you remember that? Remember seeing one?
I remember seeing one reviewing my documents, and it would have been a standard part of our product development to have put together a business case.
CEL 401858, please. This is his business case, as you can see from the bottom right-hand corner. And if you go to the first page under JR, it says project definition, and the date is on the right-hand side, 7th of June 13. So this is before the Celotex meeting. Objective, to develop and launch AE 5000, suitable for rain screen cladding applications, fire tested in accordance with BS 8414 for use above 18 metres. Now, AE 5000, what does AE stand for?
It was a working title for the project, which would have stood for above 18.
So AE above 18. So not RS at that stage.
No, we made a decision to change it to rain screen 5 or RS 5000 at a later date.
When was that?
I don't recall exactly when.
Right. Under market information and current position in the next block down, it says in the last sentence, one of the main product gaps against phenolic is for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. It seems from this that competition with phenolic was the main driver for why Celotex felt it needed to develop a product for use above 18 metres. Is that right?
Yes, it was one of the main drivers of the...
Yeah. And in the next block down, in the last two sentences, it says phenolic products, primarily K15, make up 450,000 square metres of overall annual opportunity. This equates to a market value for rigid board insulation into ventilated facade applications of £5.5 million. Now, you say in your statement, just looking at that, and this is paragraph 44 on page 12, there's no need to go to it, that the above 18-metre project was just one of many projects that the marketing department was involved with during 2013 and 2014. Is it fair to say that it was a particularly important project at that time?
It was an important project, yes.
Because it was addressing one of your main market gaps against one of your main competitors?
Yes.
Under the next block, routes to market, push/pull strategy applies, primary market of specifiers, architects and rain screen specific contractors, secondary market of specialist distributors. Did the marketing strategy rely in part on getting distributors to push AE 5000 as it was then called?
The main purpose of the push-pull strategy was for us to generate demand for products through specifiers and architects, and the role of the distributor was to service those requests, which was the opposite really of the general 4000 Celotex range. The opposite applied.
Right. I rather got the opposite impression, that it would be the architects and professionals who would be pulling it in by demand, and distributors who were basically at the end of the sales chain would be pushing it out. Is that wrong?
Yeah, the push-pull strategy, I never quite understood the terminology there, but essentially what it was what that means is it's about getting specifiers, architects, etc., to put the product into drawings and planning proposals, design proposals, sorry, at an early stage.
Right.
And therefore the distributor really then just services the demand for the product through the insulation manufacturer.
All right. So to summarise your understanding of this, the principal route to market was specifiers, architects, and rain screen specific contractors. In other words,
Yes.
end users.
Wouldn't say they were end users. We wouldn't have determined an architect as an end user.
Would you not?
No, we would have said they were designers, specifiers.
All right. Well, let me try this one. People making the ultimate decisions on what insulation products to use above 18 metres.
Yes.
Right. If we go to page 2, under testing/approvals, we can see on the top of the page there that the report says above 18-metre approval in accordance with both BS 8414 Part 1 and BS 8414 Part 2. BBA approval in year 2 or 3 if Kingspan's attack starts to affect level of business. What did you mean, or what did you understand was meant there by Kingspan's attack?
Kingspan's attack there would have meant a reaction to the fact that an application that they have almost entirely to themselves for rigid foam is starting to have other manufacturers competing with them.
I see. So did you expect them to retaliate in response to your proposed launch of RS 5000 as it became?
Don't really recall thinking too much about that, other than knowing how Kingspan had generally reacted to other products that we'd launched into that kind of specification space that they were in.
Do we take from this that the proposal, at least, that John Roper was putting forward to you was that there would be no need to go and get BBA approval for RS 5000 until 1 or 2 years, maybe 3 years in, to see whether Kingspan effectively retaliated?
Perhaps, or it might be worded, just reading it there, sorry, is that the fact that Kingspan had a BBA certificate, they might use that as a counter attack against Celotex.
Well, it says BBA approval in year 2 or 3. That would be Celotex acquiring BBA approval.
Yes.
If Kingspan's attack starts to affect level of business, and the way I read that, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you would only get BBA approval in those years depending upon whether Kingspan's attack, as you called it, its reaction, started to affect the level of RS 5000 business.
Yes.
Yes. And in the meantime, you wouldn't need to go and get a BBA approval.
I don't believe BBA approval was seen as necessary for launch, no.
No. Then, under installation requirements, it says no change from existing FR 5000 rain screen cladding application details. Reports showing permutations of fire test will be available. Is that because the FR 5000 rain screen cladding, as it were, was the same as RS 5000? In other words, installation requirements wouldn't need to change because the product was the same.
No, I think it's because the application is the same. whether it's about below 18 metres, which is the Celotex would have been supplying into the below 18 metre range screen cladding market. I don't think the application guidelines would have changed depending if it went above 18 metres.
Yes, I understand. And further down the page, it says under product positions and USPs in the final sentence there, easier specification solution and 15% more cost effective than Kingspan. What did easier specification solution mean to you?
I don't know actually.
Did it mean a wider range of applications than K15?
No, I don't believe so.
Was it anything to do with lambdas, with the U values?
No, I don't recall what. I don't ever remember seeing easier specification solution used anywhere else when we were just, launching the RS 5000 range.
Going back to installation requirements, in the light of that, it says report showing permutations of fire test will be available in the second sentence there. Was your plan at this point to get a field of application report? Is that what the report?
I don't know whether that was at this stage. I can't remember the timeline of. I can't remember when this document was dated and how that relates to the other timings of when we were working up.
What did you understand report showing permutations of fire test to mean?
I'm sitting here today. Sorry, I don't know.
Okay. And then going back down to product positions and USP section, looking at the second and third sentences, you see it says over 100% more thermally efficient than mineral fibre insulation materials, better U values and thinner solutions. Is that a reference to the U values being better than phenolic and therefore less of it being required on the exterior of a building?
I think it's more linked to the mineral fibre because Celotex had a worse lambda value than Kingspan, so we wouldn't have been able to say better U values.
I see. Now, can I just ask you some questions about IFC?
Yes.
Can we go to CEL 402743, please? These are handwritten notes of a meeting between IFC and Celotex dated the 22nd of July 2013. Now, we understand that Rob Warren was the author of these notes, but that you were present at the meeting. Do you remember this meeting?
I remember being at one meeting with IFC, yes.
And do you think this was it, 22nd of July 2013? Would the date ring a bell with you?
The date doesn't ring a bell. The name Peter Jackman does. The name Pavina Patel does as well, but I don't. But I thought when I met with Peter, it was just Peter from IFC, but I can't be 100% certain.
And if we look at the top of the page, we can see that the title of the meeting is Above 18 Metre Test, and we can see that Peter Jackman and Pavina Patel were there, and they're telling you a little bit about IFC, it seems. And then there's a heading, Fire Safety Act 2005, Regulatory Reform Order. And then a little bit lower down than that, you can see it says ADB, guidance only, can be, quotes, interpreted, close quotes, if you know what you are talking about. Do you recall that being said, or words to that effect?
No.
You don't know who might have said that ADB was capable of being, quotes, interpreted, close quotes?
No, I wouldn't recall.
Was there any discussion in general terms that you recall about ADB being understood in a particular way that could be ambiguous or that the guidance could be circumvented in some way?
No, not that I recall, no.
Or that it was soft guidance?
No, never used.
Further down on the right-hand side, you can see, just a little bit down, it says FR 5000 rename. Do you remember whether it was you or Rob Warren who said that?
I don't know. I don't know whether this was the meeting with IFC that I was at, so I can't say it was me.
You can't help.
No.
It is right, though, isn't it, that FR 5000 was going to be renamed and in the end ended up having the brand name RS 5000?
Yes.
It's quite clear that it was never going to be a new product.
No.
No. Now, let's go to CEL 50670. This is an email from you to Joe Mahoney, copied to Jonathan Roper on the 27th of August 2013, as we can see there. And it says, still awaiting green light from fire consultant that the FR range will have a good chance of passing the test, what we have paid the £1,000 so far for. Once we have this confirmation, we will begin designing the test rig and overall system and book the rig with BRE. At this point, we will need to pay for the main test. Best estimate as it sits today is that this will be an October spend with the test sometime in November. John will provide more detail when he returns from holidays, week commencing 9th September. That was the ambition at that stage, and you were going to Joe Mahoney because he held the purse strings for the test, for the budget for the test. Is that right?
Yes, Joe Mahoney held the budget for all UK and product approvals and testing.
Right. Now, do you remember, just moving forward a little bit further into the year, that in early October, Jonathan Roper and Jamie Hayes attended a meeting with IFC and Celotex?
From what I've reviewed as part of my statement, then yes, I recall.
But you have no independent recollection of that, being told about it?
I do remember them going to that meeting, yes.
Let's see the note of the meeting. CEL 401194, please. This is an email from Jamie Hayes to Rob Warren and you, attaching the note of the summary of their meeting with Celotex on Thursday. That was the week before. This email is the 7th of October. The meeting was on the 3rd. So you did definitely see this note, looking at this email?
Yes, I believe so.
Yes. Let's look at the note. It's at CEL 401195. And this is John Roper's note of the meeting, and it's entitled Above 18 Metres Fire Test, IFC and Celotex Meeting, Peterlee, 3rd of October 2013, Summary. Present, John Egginton, Celotex, David Cooper, IFC, John Roper and Jamie Hayes, both from Celotex. And you can see that the first bullet point down under fire test is very problematic to pass. Kingspan failed twice with standard cavity barriers. And then you look a little bit lower down, and it says, John at Celotex, sceptical about pass with decorative cladding. And then still no idea how Kingspan support the use of decorative cladding as their fire test uses a non-combustible cladding. And then very unlikely to pass on the basis that Celotex FR 5000 is slightly better than phenolic, according to IFC testing. Possible idea to design double cavity barrier. Now, just looking at that first, what did you understand when you read this note was meant by a decorative cladding panel?
I don't believe I would have known what a decorative cladding panel was.
Right.
It's not a term I had heard or have heard since, decorative.
Right. I mean, looking at this note and the parts that I've read to you, overall, the impression that it gives is that this was not very encouraging feedback for the prospects of FR 5000 passing a BS 8414 test. Is that fair?
Yes.
And also raising the question about how it could be that Kingspan had passed an 8414 test for K15. Yes?
Yeah, based on the first bullet, yes.
Based on the first bullet. And also question about how Kingspan could support the use of decorative cladding, given that the test that they did pass used a non-combustible cladding. Is that also a fair?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yes. That the note told you that those at the meeting were still puzzled as to how Kingspan could advertise or push a K15 for use with a decorative cladding in a cladding system, given that their fire test had used a non-combustible cladding.
Yes.
Yeah. So, discouraging and two mysteries about Kingspan would be the summary. Is that fair?
Yes, as part of the general scoping of the market and the research that John was doing with Jamie's support, yes.
Yeah. Yes. Now, can we go to your witness statement, please, at page 21 and go to paragraph 71? I'd like to look at the whole paragraph with you. I do not now recall reading this note or my reaction to it at the time, and I do not know which of the attendees at this meeting would have made each of the comments noted above, save where the comment makes it clear. As I noted at paragraph 60 above, I believe I appreciated at the time, and indeed before receiving this note, that not all systems incorporating FR 5000 were likely to pass BS 8414. At this stage, we were still trying to gather as much information as possible so that a decision could be taken by the business on whether to proceed with the test, and if so, with what system. I also think the fact that a system incorporating K15 had passed this test and was being regularly specified, apparently without negative feedback, within the market encouraged me that our goal was achievable. By this I mean nothing negative was being fed to us by our customers or members of our sales teams. As K15 was our benchmark, and so far as I was concerned, there was very little product-to-product difference. This gave me confidence PIR could be a viable market solution. Now, I'll show you that. I have some questions about that. You've already agreed that the K15 test, which you understood used a cement particle board, was wholly unrepresentative of what was actually used in the market. That's right, isn't it?
Sorry, when did I say that?
Do you agree that the K15, let me try it a different way. Do you agree that the K15 test, which you could see from the note had used a cement particle board, was highly unrepresentative of a board or panel for rain screen that was being used in the market?
I wouldn't know it was wholly unrepresentative on the basis that there was other... I knew that things like field of application might be able to interpret data, and I wasn't really looking at that particular cladding type.
Well, let me try it a different way. In your experience thus far, this is late 2013, had you come across any cladding systems which had used cement particle board as the rain screen?
No, but I wouldn't also be aware of what other types of cladding system were available either.
No, but never mind about that. I'm just asking you to address my specific question, which is, given that Kingspan used a cement particle board as the rain screen panel in their BS 8414 test, did it not strike you at the time that the use of that material as a rain screen panel was completely unrepresentative of the norm for rain screen systems?
Yeah, yes, I would say it seems, based on the information that was provided, that it was not common.
No, and as a product manager, you must have had some idea about what was common in the market.
No, because in my role as product manager, I got very, very little, didn't get involved at all with rain screen cladding as an application.
At all events, you didn't want to use a cement particle board in your test. Is that right?
Certainly throughout this time frame of the market being scoped, I didn't want to do what Kingspan were looking like they were doing.
And why was that?
I wanted us to be to have a more credible solution.
More credible in what way?
That to use those words, more representative.
More representative,
or a more typical rain screen cladding panel.
Yes. So not cement particle board, but something that would be more often used by people who built rain screen systems.
Yes.
Yes. Now, this note of the meeting I've shown you with Celotex and IFC explicitly told you that the prospects of passing the test using a decorative panel were not good. And by decorative panel, Mr. Roper told us yesterday that meant something, and I'm paraphrasing his evidence, that looked nice on the outside.
Right.
And he expressly excluded from that a Marley Eternit Natura panel, which he said was a decorative panel of sorts. But did you understand what was meant by decorative?
No.
Did you ask?
No.
This note, and we can go back to it if need be, it also informed you that some form of enhanced cavity barrier would be necessary in order for a system using a decorative panel to pass. Do you remember that? We can go back to it if you like.
I remember just seeing it a second ago.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. In the light of that, why were you at all encouraged that the goal was achievable, as you say?
At the time, and based on what I can recall at the time, our benchmark was the K15 product. Therefore, there must have been ways in which that product was allowed to be specified and installed on buildings.
But what you were told was that K15 had passed a test and was therefore being used because it had passed a test using a cement particle board as a rain screen cladding. And you said that wasn't representative and you wanted to be more representative. My question is, what was the source or basis of your optimism, given that you wanted to be more representative of the market than Kingspan?
I don't recall, sorry.
And I'm trying to get to the bottom of your reasoning here in paragraph 71. On what basis did you think that a BS8414 test of RS5000 as it became was likely to be successful, given that Kingspan had only passed that test using an unrepresentative cladding?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know. Can't recall my thinking at the time.
Well, you've done enough in your paragraph 71 to tell us about what your thinking was at the time, but now you're not sitting there able to explain.
My thinking at the time was that the K15 product was on the market, and therefore there must be other ways in which the product would be allowed to be used.
But you didn't know what those were?
No.
So far as you could see?
No, but this is generally where it was part of a market scoping and understanding exercise.
So when you say, I also think the fact that a system incorporating K15 had passed this test and was regularly being specified apparently without negative feedback within the market encouraged me that our goal was achievable. Do you really mean there that the fact that K15 had somehow got away with it meant that you might also be able to get away with it? Was that your thinking?
I wouldn't say get away with it. The product was being used, and my thinking at the time was, certainly at a product level, is why can Kingspan's K15 be used and Celotex's FRRS 5000 product, which has very similar properties, can't be used?
And the fact that you'd had no answer to that question led you to be encouraged that you might be able to launch FR 5000 as an above 80-metre product?
Well, I think it was more based on getting feedback from the market as well.
Did you think at the time that a test of a cladding system incorporating any cladding panels other than a cement particle board would have any chance of succeeding?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Did you think, yes, did you think at the time that a BS8414 test of a cladding system incorporating any cladding panels other than a cement particle board, as K15 had done, would have any chance of succeeding?
I don't recall what other cladding panels were being talked about or thought about.
Well, you could see from the SOTEC meeting note that decorative panels were being discounted, so that marked them out. You didn't want to go the cement particle route because it wasn't representative. What was the basis for your being optimistic that if you were going to sell RS 5000 as it became for use with a representative system or range of systems, what was the basis for your being optimistic that RS 5000 would pass such a test?
Only the fact that K15 was being used as well.
But you didn't know how?
No.
Can we move on? Let's go to CEL 50716. Now, this is a long email which John Roper sent to you on the 1st of November 2013. And as I did with him, I'd like to spend a little bit of time with you on this document. And we know you received it because you responded, and I'll show you your response shortly. Are you familiar with this document?
I'm familiar with it since it being presented to me.
Well, were you familiar with it at the time? Having reviewed it?
Again, having reviewed it as part of this process, I can see that I was on holiday at the time, so when I replied relatively quickly to John from when he sent it to me. So I would have read it, but I wouldn't have given it a huge amount of time.
All right, well, let's just go to page 2 of this email run to see what it was that gave rise to his email to you of the 1st of November. There's an email trail, as always, with these things,
Yep.
which starts at the bottom of page 2 with discussion about a TP branch. Is that a Travis Perkins branch?
Yes.
Yeah. And then moving up the page, a third of the way down, 31st of October, he emails you, standard TP margin, usually about 25%. And then, PS, need a catch-up on above 18 metres when back. We'll send an invite to you, RWCC and JH, for an update on project in a position where decisions need to be made. Catch up Monday. Enjoy the rest of your week off. Now, RW is Rob Warren, CC is Craig Chambers, and JH is Jamie Hayes in that list, isn't it? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. So you could see from that at least Craig Chambers was involved, or was proposed to be involved, for an update. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then you go back to him, same day, thanks, decent margin, and then seen the invite for Monday, so good to get that discussion going and agree way forward. Is it good news? And that's the question to which he responds. Let's turn the page.
Yes.
And he starts, well, ... So you could see from that little introduction that it wasn't good news. And he goes on to explain in great detail, with great thoroughness, what he had found. Now, I know you've read this email recently as part of preparations to give evidence, and so I'm going to assume you're familiar with it. So I'll take it as quickly as I can. But he says that there are two possible solutions for testing in which both David at IFC and I have confidence in. You see that?
Yes.
And he goes on to explain what those are. And he says in the second paragraph that after much research, he doesn't think that testing worst-case scenario with an improved fire barrier, which is what he's talking about, is possible. And I don't believe Kingspan have a similar report. And that report there, and I think I'm summarising probably a little bit disjointedly, the fact that he's discounting a field of application report. Is that how you read it?
Yes, on the basis of the assessment report which he references in paragraph 1.
Yes. And then he goes on to say, we cannot seem to find or design a suitable barrier in which we have enough confidence that it can be used behind a standard ACM panel, which we know will melt and allow fire into the cavity. Now, just pausing there, he told us that he got that information from Celotex, because they told him that, essentially, in the June of 2013. But he's assuming that you know what an ACM panel is. Did you know at that stage what an ACM panel was?
I don't believe so, no, not in terms of what it meant.
We don't see you going back to him and saying, sorry, John, what's an ACM panel, do we?
No. What I did do is, on the basis that this seems to be the conclusion of his months of market scoping, is why I'm then suggesting that he gets this meeting together with the managing director, myself, and really the two main technical people in the business.
Yes. My question really is, when he mentioned standard ACM panel, did you know what he was talking about?
I can't recall at the time whether I'd have known exactly what a standard ACM panel meant, no.
Okay, he goes on, speaking to Simco on Wednesday in Birmingham with IL, that's Ian Lathbury.
Yes.
He confirmed that architects will specify K15 with a standard fire barrier and panel when the work is contracted and then subcontracted to cladding contractors such as Simco, HA Mark, Stanmore, etc. They value engineer that system to be competitive at tender. This means changing fire barriers, changing panels. The architect's only guarantee is that K15 will be used because there is no other alternative available. Now, just pausing there, was he telling you something you already knew, or were you educated by his findings here?
I think I was being educated.
Right. And then he goes on, well, just pausing there, you were aware from that, I think, weren't you, that even before any testing had been carried out, FR5000 or RS5000 as it became couldn't be used in conjunction with ACM?
I don't know whether based on what I've been told in previous reports that John had put together, then yes.
Yes, fine. He then goes on, an architect will be told that K15 is applicable for above 18 metres in accordance with ADB, and that suffices from their perspective. Kingspan have done a great job at the spec end, and according to Simco, are specified much more than Rockwool Geoslab for thermal performance. As discussed above, contractors opt for more cost-effective solutions, and although they are liable for what goes into that building, they do not know enough about the fire test to challenge. The only figure who might possibly challenge a product's eligibility for use in buildings above 18 metres is the building control officer. Kingspan, I would suggest, do not have a piece of paper that states that they can specifically be used behind any cladding panel. What they have done is got a BBA certification stating the fire test method and taken that to LABC to get a registered document detail which states that K15 can be used in a variety of cladding systems and complies with ADB through passing BR135. A building control officer is unlikely to challenge a document that is approved from the head of building control. Now, that's an important paragraph. Do you accept that, or did you understand him to be saying that contractors don't have or didn't have enough knowledge to challenge the inappropriate use of insulation products above 18 metres?
I don't believe I had enough knowledge of the contractors in that market to know whether they knew that or not. I think our understanding in Celotex was that contractors would have suitable knowledge of different cladding materials.
Well, Mr. Roper is reporting back to you the products of his labour, and this is what he has found out. I'm asking you about what you understood from this email. Did you understand him to be telling you that contractors did not have enough knowledge of the guidance to challenge the inappropriate use of products above 18 metres? That's what it appears to be telling you.
At the time, I wouldn't have given it that level of thought because, as I said, I read this and replied to him, I believe, within half an hour of him sending this email at a time when I was on holiday. So I don't believe I would have been giving it that level of detail or attention.
Right. Did you not pick up from this paragraph that Mr. Roper was telling you that K15 had been able to market Cooltherm K15, Kingspan had been able to market Cooltherm K15 by getting a BBA certification, getting an LAB registration, and then using that to get past building control officers without challenge? That was the route. Did you not pick that up from
As I said, I don't think I picked any of the main detail other than just to say to John that it looks like he's scoped his understanding and to get a meeting together of people on
Right.
when I'm back.
Right. It sounds as if me asking you questions about this document may be of diminishing returns, but let's see how we go. He goes on, what does all this mean for us? System approval limits us hugely as the market is so fragmented and it's extremely difficult to grasp who is being most commonly used. The likes of Marley, Alucobond, Trespa are spec'd a lot, but value engineered out for standard aluminium panels. Just pausing there, what he was telling you there, was that news to you or was that something you already knew?
I think a lot of this is, reading it again, a lot of this is news to me.
Is news to you, but was news to you at the time?
I don't recall what I was thinking at the time.
Trying to do the right thing requires a complete re-education of the market, and this would require a huge campaign and probably a lawsuit. Two options proposed below, and then he sets them out. One, test a standard A2 panel, limited combustible panel, of which there are a few, a Alucobond A2, Marley Eternit with a standard fire barrier system. If challenged on what system to use, we can happily state that our test used an A2 panel with a particular commonly used fire barrier. Still not 100% confident in passing as A2 as a Euroclass classification derived from test data on reaction to fire testing. And just pausing there, that was an option which would at least be testing a panel which was standard in the market. Yes? A commonly used panel.
Sounds like it's yes.
Right. But the problem with that is that because it was A2, it was a Euroclass definition and therefore not the same as the UK limited combustibility or surface spread of flame panels classifications. And then the second option was opt for the Kingspan route and put a cement particle board as the cladding, use a standard fire barrier, good chance of passing knowing they have, and CP board is good in terms of resistance to fire. Now, did you read both of those options as an alternative to doing the right thing?
No, I don't believe so.
You see, he said trying to do the right thing requires a complete re-education of the market, and this would require a huge campaign and probably a lawsuit. But neither of those are the options that he then sets out.
I think what he's saying there, based on the report that he's put in before, is about what Kingspan are doing, and I think he's then saying that the market is at a place of where Kingspan has taken the education of that market, and us challenging it would be a potentially difficult exercise.
A potentially difficult exercise, re-education, and a potential lawsuit. Did you agree with him that re-educating the market would require a huge campaign and probably a lawsuit at the suit of Kingspan, as he told us yesterday?
I think there's every chance that, yes, that would have happened.
So, given that trying to do the right thing was almost impossible, the only options here were those he set out. Either a test with an A2 panel with the downsides that involved, or going the Kingspan route. That's what he's saying. Is that how you saw it?
That's how it looks there.
And then he goes on to say, after those options, however, what we do need to consider is if we have two potential systems that could pass, how do these dictate route to market? What does an ASM stroke CTC state to somebody who inquires? And those are groups within Celotex, aren't they? An area sales manager.
Yes, area sales and Celotex Technical Centre.
Yeah. If we simply have the test report, we don't want to have to provide this as evidence. And then he asks this series of questions. Do we in fact need to spend £25,000 to £30,000 for a BBA to be able to gain this document from LABC, which in my mind gives us very little chance of being challenged from building control? Do we partner with a few fire barrier manufacturers who have tested with K15 currently to gain confidence in the market that way? Or do we take the view that our product realistically shouldn't be used behind most cladding panels because in the event of a fire, it would burn? Those are three rhetorical questions. In your mind at the time, did you have an answer to them, or any of them?
No.
Did you ever come to address your mind to those questions so as to give yourself an answer to them?
Well, I think the fact that there's some major questions there that need to be asked would be the main reason why my response was to put a meeting together to talk this through.
He then goes on, what Kingspan have done extremely well is to say very little but build confidence if challenged by having fire barrier manufacturers all showing tests with K15, achieve BBA validation and subsequently gain LABC approval. There is always the chance they do have the piece of paper in the top drawer from somebody that states for use with any system, but I doubt it. Now, in reality, what he's telling you is that you either have to play in this market, which has been skewed by K15, or not enter the above 18-metre market at all. That is a blunt summary of what he's telling you, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And you knew that at the time, yes?
I knew the market was a different and challenging market for us, which is why I wanted to get the meeting together to decide what the next steps were.
And it was challenging. By now, I think you must have realised, because Kingspan occupied it almost exclusively by reason of having some certification documents based upon a test that nobody could understand. Yes?
Yes.
And that you had your strong suspicions about. Yes?
Yes.
And we can see your response, CEL 50718. And you say to him, and it's the same day, about 40 minutes after he sends it to you, great summary and shows the real merit of good research and talking to the market. We are trying not to create a me too here, but if we do, it will be for the right reasons. And then you go on to say, I suggest you put the whole 18-metre story into some slides and spend 15 minutes at the start bringing everyone up to speed on your work to date. Also have the flip chart there in case you need to draw anything up. We can then discuss how we go forward. Then you say, for me, excuse me, and then you say, for me, for every amount of confidence we lose in the other system passing needs to be offset with the same amount or more competitive advantage than doing it this way delivers. I'm not sure we'll have that, but let's discuss and also get the view of others. Please also invite Joe, or speak to him when he's back on Monday. It's his budget, and he should also have a say on whether this happens. I'm assuming that's Joe Mahoney.
Yes.
Now, just going a little bit out of that document, I want to show you your statement, because you say what you say you meant in it. Page 25, paragraph 82, you're referring there to the first part of that email. You say, in noting we are trying not to create a me too here, but if we do, it will be for the right reasons. I meant that in my mind, Celotex should not go down the same testing route as Kingspan, i.e. we should test a system that was more representative of what was actually being used in the market, and also that we should be clearer in our marketing literature about what we had tested. So what were the right reasons?
I don't know exactly what. I know what I mean by the Me Too in terms of the replication of Kingspan, but if we do it, it will be for the right reasons. I don't recall what we were thinking those reasons were. As I said, I replied to John's email very, very quickly.
Well, you replied after 40 minutes, and perhaps I'm wrong, but you had at least read and digested what he said before going back to him.
Well, I was on holiday at the time, so I don't know whether I read it as soon as it came through.
Well, you would have read it within the 40 minutes before you responded to him. Would you want to go back and look at the timings?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go back to the email itself, if we can, which is at CEL 50718. You can see halfway down page 1 on the screen there that it's sent to you from Jonathan Roper at 9:57 on the 1st of November. And at the top of the page, you respond to him on the same morning at 10:32. So that's 40 minutes, almost exactly. So do I take it from that you had received his email and allowing for some time for your smartphone to go ping, open it up and look at it? You've at least read it before going back to him.
Yes, I would have read it. What I'm saying is I don't know whether I read it at 10:25 or at 10 o'clock, so in terms of that response.
No, it doesn't matter when you read it. My question simply is that having responded to him in the way that you have, you at least took the trouble to read it, digest it, and understand it before you responded. That's all I'm putting to you.
I'm not sure I digested it and understood it.
Well, did you go back to it later and sit and read it thoroughly?
I don't know. I think the fact that...
All right, well, we're getting slightly diverted. What I really want to ask you about is, although you've told us in your statement what you meant by trying not to create a me too here, you haven't addressed the if we do, it will be for the right reasons, and I want to know what the right reasons were.
I don't recall what I mean by the right reasons.
In the end, we know, and I'm cutting a long story short, that Celotex neither tested a representative system nor was truthful in its literature about what it actually tested, was it?
Based on the marketing and the information I had, the detail of the system was what I believed had been tested.
Right, well, we'll come to that. So you don't accept what I've just put to you. Is that right?
I don't accept that the knowledge I had at the time, that what I believed had been tested was what was written in the marketing literature.
Right. Saying that you're trying not to create a me too here, did that really involve you rejecting option 2 that Mr. Roper was putting forward, namely opt for the Kingspan route and put a cement particle board as the cladding?
I think what I'm just saying there is, if we can, we don't want to try and replicate how Kingspan have done it.
Right. And then you say, as I've shown you in the third paragraph, you say, for every amount of confidence we lose in the other system passing needs to be offset with the same amount or more competitive advantage that doing it this way delivers. What's the other system passing means? Does that mean the K15 system? or what system?
Yeah, as I've said in my statement, I don't know what I mean by those sets of words.
Right. Does this mean that even if you were less confident in the system that you were going to test would pass, you would need to have equal and opposite confidence that you'd gain a competitive advantage if it did?
As I said, I don't, sitting here and having reflected on them even when I was putting my statement together, I don't understand or know what I've meant by that statement.
Right. In a nutshell, were you trying to say, and I'll just have one more go here, that it was only worth avoiding the Kingspan route if there was sufficient competitive advantage to doing so?
I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know.
All right. Now, there was then a decision to test, and you say in your statement that decision was taken in late 2013. It's paragraph 77. And you say that that decision was taken at a meeting on the 4th of November 2013, at which Mr. Roper, Mr. Hayes, Mr. Warren, and Mr. Chambers were present. That's what you say. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yes. That decision to have that meeting was made following the email that we've just been looking at, the email exchange I've just been showing you, yes?
Yes, that's what I've asked John to do, is set the meeting up when I'm...
Now, I'm going to show you some slides for that meeting. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment for the afternoon?
Well, I was just thinking it might be, yes.
Yeah.
So we'll take a break at this point, Mr. Evans. We'll come back at 25 to 4, please.
Okay.
And again, while you're out of the room, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it. All right? Right, would you like to go to the usher then?
Thank you.
Please? Good, thank you. 25 to 4. Thank you. Yes, would you ask Mr. Evans to come in, please? How are you doing for water there, Mr. Evans?
I'm fine, thank
You've
you.
got enough, have you?
Yes, thank you.
Right, ready to carry on?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Evans, can I ask you to look, please, at CEL 11199. These are the slides that you asked Mr. Roper to produce for the 4th of November meeting, are they not?
Yes.
And can we look at slide 14, please, on page 14? This set out 5 options, Celotex options, and you can see them there. Are these the alternative routes that you considered that Celotex might follow?
I think they're the options from the meeting based on John's research.
And the first is worst case scenario with field of application report. What did you understand he meant by worst case scenario?
I think not a great set of words, but I think what he's saying there is to test to a test as a set of like a system, put a steel frame a frame together, and then have an expert that's able to assess what was designed to see whether it would cover other types of cladding system.
Right. And did you understand that it was a worst case scenario because obtaining a field of application report was the least likely?
No, I don't believe so. I've seen field of application reports used in other applications.
Right. So what was worst case scenario about it then?
Probably I don't know exactly, but just a system that then would allow results to be taken from that to say that it would also be okay to be used in these other applications or on these other systems.
And then second item down, or option down, system route, limit scope, requires re-education. What did you understand by that?
I think at the time that was more about going down a specific system that didn't allow any level of field of application report to come from it.
Requires re-education. What did you understand by that?
I think that's in relation to the previous comments where we would have to explain to the market a lot about how we saw the market.
Right. And how you saw the market being what exactly?
How the market with Kingspan as the only player in that market were working.
Does that mean, and linking this with the email we've been looking at of the 1st of November from Mr. Roper, does that mean re-educating the market to teach them that they had been, up to this point, misunderstanding the meaning and scope of BS 8414 tests and the BR 135 criteria by allowing Kingspan K15 onto a wider set of applications than that which was tested?
Yes, I think that's what it means.
Right. And that was risky because that might invite a lawsuit from Kingspan, among other things.
Quite possibly.
Now, the third options, test and launch without BBA and LABC, test and launch with BBA and LABC, opt out of 18 metres. At the meeting, do you remember discussing opting out of 18 metres? Opting out of above 18 metres?
I think on the basis that was put as a bullet point on a number of slides, it would have been mentioned, yes.
Was there any discussion about whether or not, in fact, what Celotex should be doing is not going anywhere near the above 18 metre market?
I don't recall that being part of the conversation
So
in any detail.
Although this was listed on this slide as an option, in fact, was a decision taken at this meeting that was not an option?
At that time, I don't believe opting out of above 18 metres was where we were going to go until we had looked at doing some testing.
Right. So it remained an option depending on the test?
I believe so, yes. Until we launched the product into the market, opting out was always an option.
I follow. Now, can we go to the next slide, 15, please? That seems to set out 3 outcomes, ACM panel with improved barrier system less than 50%, A2 panel with standard barrier 80%, cement particle with standard barrier 90%. Was there any discussion of that slide?
Again, on the basis that it had been put together, it would be strange if it wasn't discussed. I don't recall the specific discussions around each of those three options, but I can't believe that that wouldn't have been discussed as part of the meeting.
Did you all come to the view that there was a less than 50% chance that success would be possible using an ACM panel?
I believe
with
they
an
would have
improved barrier
been,
system.
I believe they were the probabilities were put together by John based on his understanding of the market. I don't believe we talked about the percentages.
Right. Was there any disagreement at the meeting about those percentages?
Not that I can recall.
Using a cement particle board, as Kingspan had done, would give you a 90% chance of success, as we can see, wouldn't it?
That's what that's saying, yes.
Was there any discussion of going down that route at the meeting?
I don't recall.
Now, following this meeting, Celotex decided to adopt the option of testing in a system using A2 cladding, didn't it?
Yes.
And in his statement, but let's look at it, Mr. Roper's statement at CEL 3010052, page 10, please, he says something about this meeting at paragraph 5.14. Now, he says he wasn't present at the meeting. But in fact, he corrected that yesterday in his evidence and said that he was. To the best of your recollection, is he right about that?
My understanding is that John was there because he was asked to set the meeting up, he was asked to prepare the slides. Therefore, there would be no reason why John wouldn't have come to the meeting having prepared the slides. That just wouldn't have happened.
No. And did he present the slides? Do you remember?
As certain as I can be, he would have done. I don't believe anybody else would have presented the slides.
Right. And then in paragraph 5.14, he says, I was aware that Rob and Paul expressed their views at this meeting. These were not entirely aligned. Prior to this meeting, I was already aware that Rob was clear in his views that BS 8414 was a system test and that the test report relating to a successful test was only applicable to that particular system. Just pausing there, were you aware before the meeting that those were Rob Warren's views?
Not that I recall, and I don't believe Rob and I had particularly differing views on the importance of having a system that we communicated as it being a system.
And then it goes on, Craig Chambers and Paul, that's you, were aware that Kingspan was selling successfully on the basis of one BS 8414 test, as to which it provided only limited information to the market and that Kingspan did not seem to be being asked for further details of their test. Craig Chambers and Paul's view was that adopting Rob's interpretation would limit sales and would not be a reflection of market dynamics. Is that correct? Was that your view?
No, that wasn't my view. My view was that if we were to go with this market, we should be very clear that we've tested in a particular way to a particular system. People might want to take those results and make the decision that based on that, the product can also be used in a different system. But I don't believe that mine and Craig's view was entirely different to Rob's. No.
Right. You see, Mr. Roper remembers it differently.
Okay.
And that Rob Warren and he in his own mind were taking what he called the technical approach, namely paying strict adherence to the limits of the BS 8414 test as a system test, and that you and Mr. Chambers were taking a more commercial view, which wouldn't limit sales. Is that a fair description of division of views at the time?
I'm a little bit confused because my interpretation seems to be similar to Rob's, which is there's a test which we've carried out and we will be open with how we've tested and trying to communicate better to the market that that's how we have tested. Naturally, that would have limited sales, but I believe that anybody in the business and in that meeting would know it would limit sales. We weren't saying to go out and sell it into any cladding system that you like.
he says, Craig Chambers and Paul's view is that adopting Rob's interpretation, that's an interpretation of the BS 8414 test and BR 135 criteria, as is obvious from the context. Did you adopt or have a different interpretation from the one espoused by Rob Warren, do you think?
My view was almost seems the same as Rob's. That's why I'm a little bit confused. I don't know. I can't understand from John's statement, what Rob's interpretation was that makes it different to mine. I was clear that it was BS 8414 was a system test, and that we would make it clear in our marketing the system in which we had tested.
Right. Well, let's see how that turns out. Can we move forward then into February 2014 and the test itself? Now, you say in your first statement, paragraph 94, that you weren't involved in the preparations for the first test. Is that right?
Not that I can recall, no.
Now, considering that Mr. Roper reported to you, are you sure that that's right?
Yeah, I think whilst John reported to me, I'm confident that he would have all of that knowledge that or expertise that he needed around the actual testing, he would have got from others, be it Rob, be it Jamie, or third parties he was using to do the test, or the test house itself.
Now, considering that Mr. Roper reported to you, were there any aspects of the February 2014 test that you weren't aware of?
Not that I can recall, no.
No. Now, you weren't present at the test in February 2014, were you?
No.
But Mr. Roper was, wasn't he?
I believe, yeah, Mr. Roper was, yes.
And he reported back to you following the test, didn't he? He rang you.
Yes, so he would have. Yeah, I'm sure he would have rung me to say whether it had passed or failed.
And he rang you to tell you that it had failed, didn't he?
Yes, I think he did.
And he rang you from the car, I think we were told yesterday on his return, from the Watford Fire Hall.
Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Hayes said that there was a lot of emotion around that call. That's what he says in his statement, because he was in the car at the time with Mr. Roper. Do you remember that conversation was an emotional one?
I wouldn't say it was emotional. I think there would have been disappointment, but I think that would have been something that would have been disappointing regardless of the application. We were a business that relied on doing testing, and a test not passing would have been met with some level of disappointment for a few reasons.
Can we look at your statement at page 28, please? And let's look at paragraph 97 together. You say there, I was disappointed when I heard that the system had failed the test. We had invested time and money and had not got the result we were hoping for. The fact that the test had failed was therefore a setback, of course, but it was not, in my view, a particularly significant one for Celotex. This was because the plan to develop RS5000 was only one of a number of projects that Celotex was pursuing at that time. Is it really true, Mr. Evans, given that without a pass, you couldn't market RS5000 above 18 metres at all?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Was it really true that that it wasn't a significant setback, given that without a pass of the BS 8414 test, you couldn't market RS5000 above 18 metres at all?
No, because we could discuss what the next steps were for that if we needed to, and the difference between a business pre-acquisition by Saint-Gobain and post-acquisition by Saint-Gobain is I was probably a little bit more aware that if we needed to, there would be more money available for it. So doing a second test wouldn't have been as much of a problem as maybe some people might have thought it might have been.
Well, I understand that, but it must have been a setback, and a significant one, I have to suggest to you, given that without a BS 8414 test pass, you couldn't access the above 18 metre market at all.
Yes, it was a disappointment and it was a setback, but I can't remember it being a huge problem for the business. It just meant that our launch of above 18 metres would need to be delayed I would imagine.
Well, you don't say that. You actually say in the last sentence there that the reason it wasn't, in your view, a particularly significant setback for Celotex was, and I quote, because the plan to develop RS5000 was only one of a number of projects that Celotex was pursuing at that time. Now, the impression the reader gets from that is that it wasn't a significant setback because the 18-metre market project was only one of a number of projects. You're now saying something different, I think.
Yeah, sorry. There was a number of projects that Celotex was working on, and it was a setback and a disappointment, but I don't think it was a major setback because there would have been an opportunity, probably in my mind, to know that if we wanted to, we could go and test again if we needed to.
My point is you don't say that as the reason for your thinking at the time here at paragraph 97. You've accorded a different reason, which was that the RS5000 was only one of a number of projects. And now you're saying it wasn't a significant setback because you could have got more money for a later test. Which is it?
I think it's a combination of both things.
Well, why haven't you made that clearer here?
I don't know.
I mean, why have I got to ask you questions about this?
That was my recollection when I put my statement together.
I mean, the reality is that the fail meant that you would now have to work out how RS5000, a project which had been on the stocks since January 2013, could now pass a BSA 414 test. No?
Yes, we would need to look at how we would need to retest.
And you would have to arrange a new test?
Yes?
And you'd have to wait for a new test?
Yes?
And you'd have to get the budget for a new test?
Yes.
And had you told Joe Mahoney before February 2014 that this first one might not work and he might have to open the coffers for a second test?
I don't recall whether I told Joe that at all.
No. And so given all those things that you would now have to do without any very clear view as to how to go about passing a second test, I have to suggest to you that it was a significant setback for Celotex, and that the reason you've given in paragraph 97 is just wrong.
No, I wouldn't say it was wrong. As I recall, the disappointment of failing the first test was, of course, a disappointment for the people that had been working on the project and for the business in terms of its plans. But I don't think it significantly stopped the process for that particular product as well as the other projects that we were working on.
Well, I suggest you're downplaying this, aren't you?
Doesn't. I can only go based on the experience that I can remember from the time.
Can you just help? Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Can you just help me with this? If I've understood your evidence correctly, this test was intended to be a representative test in the choice of materials.
Yes.
And that was deliberate so that you could, if it passed, you could say to people, we've tested it in a system which is representative of what is being actually used out there. Is that right?
Yes.
Once it had failed, what led you to believe that it could be modified in a way that would still be representative but likely to pass?
I don't know the answer to that or how I felt at the time about what that would be, other than taking advice from people in the team as to how that could happen.
And without a pass, you were barred from the over 18 metre market, weren't
Yes.
you? So unless you could see some way through to getting a representative test that did pass, you were a bit stuck.
Yes, we would have been.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Can you please turn to page 29 of your statement? At paragraph 102 there, you say, although I would have been consulted, the decision on what to retest would not have been mine because I did not have the technical knowledge or expertise to make that decision. The decision-making process would have involved Mr. Roper and Mr. Warren. Just pausing there, why would Mr. Roper have had any technical knowledge or expertise as someone who'd only left university the year before, maybe 18 months before?
I think it's more based on the knowledge and expertise that he's built up working on this application rather than his broader qualified technical knowledge is what I mean there.
Are you really saying that he would have been a decision maker in your place in relation to the decision to retest?
I think he would have been able to recommend what needed to happen and people in the business would have listened to what he had to say.
Maybe, but you're not saying that he was a decision maker as opposed to a contributor to the information, which would form the basis of that decision.
I think the decision about what we were going to do, using that word there, the making of the decision would have come from John and Rob having that technical knowledge.
You're not saying that the product manager that you line managed was going to be the ultimate decision maker, and you not, are you?
I don't think I would have been the ultimate decision maker either. I wouldn't have been confident making that decision, which is why I would have taken that decision to be more of a project approach, similar to what I did back in November when I was getting everybody together to discuss John's research. I didn't have that technical knowledge myself.
You were involved in the overall decision to retest, weren't you?
Yes, I would have supported a decision to retest.
Which is why you go on to say, as for the overall decision to retest, in addition to me, Mr. Chambers would have been involved. So you've identified a number of people here, but actually you were one of the ultimate decision makers about whether there should be a retest, correct?
About to retest, yes.
Yeah.
The technical intricacies of the testing, then no.
And you go on to say this was to be the first major product launch since Saint-Gobain's acquisition of Celotex in 2012. So not only was he interested in being kept apprised of progress, that's Mr. Chambers, but the cost of the retest was such that it would have required consultation with him and approval by him. Now, given that this was the first product launch since the Saint-Gobain acquisition, and significant enough that the CEO would have been involved in the decision to retest, combined with the fact that Celotex had been considering the above 18-metre market since 2012, and you didn't want any delay in the timetable, this, I have to suggest to you, was a major setback, which would have required an important decision to be made by senior decision makers.
I think when you piece all of that together, I can see why you would say a major setback. All I can say is what it felt like at the time, and there wasn't. It didn't feel like it was the major setback.
Now, following the failed test, you then sent Mr. Roper a meeting invite for a meeting on the 18th of February 2014, I think. I'll show you the document. It's CEL 403072. There it is. Do you remember having a meeting with Mr. Roper in your office on the 18th of February 2014?
No, I don't, sorry.
The subject of the meeting is BR135, and given the proximity to the failed test, presumably you discussed that with him. Can we take it from that, or can you not assist?
I can't agree. I can't remember whether that meeting happened. So I can't answer that yes or no, really.
Right. Do you remember having a discussion, whether in a meeting or otherwise, with Mr. Roper after the failed test about what would be required to pass the test next time round?
I'm sure there was some discussion, whether it was with just myself and John or whether it was with other people. I don't know. My understanding is that we decided to test a thicker cladding panel.
Can we go to CEL 3010154, please? And look at page 19. This is Mr. Hayes' witness statement again. And I'd like to look with you, please, if I can, at paragraphs 57 and 58 there. They're quite long. But what Mr. Hayes says is that he was involved in meetings with you, John Roper, and Rob Warren, in which you started to draw conclusions about what caused the fire to spread to the top in the way that it did. And that's what he says at the beginning of paragraph 58. Do you remember those discussions?
I don't recall a meeting between myself, John, Rob and Jamie that talked in that detail.
Right. You see, he goes on in the second sentence in paragraph 58 to say, I was involved in these meetings and discussions with JR, PE and RW. But you say you don't remember those.
I don't recall them, no.
You don't recall them, no. But you don't say they didn't happen.
No, I can't say they didn't happen, but I don't recall them happening.
And at the end of paragraph 58, he says that collectively we were content with the remaining components of the rig, including the use of RS5000, which did not change from the first test to the second test. Do you recall any discussions at that time, or perhaps later, involving you about changing the components in the rig?
My only recollection of a decision that was made from the first test to the second test was the changing of the thickness of the cladding panel.
Well, let's go on and see what he says on that score and other scores. Over the page, please. And I'm going to read you paragraphs 61 and 62 of his statement. At 61, he says on page 20, I therefore went to JR, RW and PE with a suggestion that we also include an additional board of material behind the cladding just at the point of the fire barriers. This, in conjunction with the thicker cladding, would increase the time it took for any fire to progress through the cladding and consequently climb the rig. The board I suggested was a 6mm magnesium oxide board placed behind the cladding, which he then defines as the additional material. This would be used in conjunction with the now 12mm thick layer of the cladding. JR and PE agreed to adopt this approach in principle, with PE having the final sign-off. However, they also decided to amend the thickness of the cladding at the point where the additional material was placed from 12mm to 8mm thick to try and ensure continuity of the cladding surface across the rig. We wanted to use 6mm cladding at the point where the 6mm additional material was to be placed so that the two combined would be the same thickness as the 12mm cladding across the rest of the rig. Unfortunately, Marley Eternit was not sold in 6mm thickness, but only to 8mm or 12mm, as evidenced in the email correspondence sourcing the materials, which he exhibits. And I've read that all to you. Do you recall that it was Mr. Hayes who came up with the idea of placing a 6mm magnesium board behind the thickened cladding?
No, as I say, the only recollection I have of the change between the first test and the second test was the move to a thicker cladding panel.
Well, let's just go back to paragraph 62 and take it stage by stage and see exactly what it is you do and don't recall. Can we go back a page, please? Now, he says in the third line, JR, that's John Roper,
yes,
and PE agreed to adopt this approach in principle, with PE having the final sign-off. Now, John Roper recalls that. What about you? Did you agree to adopt this approach in principle?
No.
Did you have the final sign-off?
No, I wouldn't have had final sign-off. I wouldn't have given myself final sign-off because of my, compared to the other individuals involved in that test and the designing and their knowledge, I wouldn't have been confident giving any technical sign-off on the design of a new rig.
Well, both Mr. Roper and Mr. Hayes recall the suggestion being made and you agreeing to it and having the final sign-off. Are you saying that they're wrong in their recollection, or simply that you just don't recall one way or the other?
I would say they're wrong because I know from everything that's happened from the launch of the product through to what's happened, that not one point in any of that did I know about a 6mm magnesium oxide board until I found a reference to it on my phone in November 2017.
Is that a fact?
Yes.
You had no idea? Are you telling us you had no idea?
I didn't know
the addition of the 6mm magnesium board behind the 8mm, as it turned out, Marley Eternit Natura on the rig?
The only thing I knew was that I recall was that we had changed the thickness of the cladding panel.
You're sure about that?
Yes.
So you're saying this isn't. Be careful here. This isn't just that you can't recall one way or the other. You're saying, are you, that both Mr. Roper in his evidence yesterday and Mr. Hayes in his evidence here at paragraph 62 are false?
What I'm saying is that I didn't know that we had put a 6mm magnesium oxide. I know there's the NHBC discussion, which I've seen in my evidence as well, where information's been given to me and I haven't taken that information or understood that information for whatever reason, but I didn't know that what we were doing here, I didn't know that we were doing it.
So, just to be clear, again, I'm going to put this to you one more time. Are you saying that what John Roper said yesterday and what Mr. Hayes is saying here about you agreeing to adopt this approach is false?
Yes, based on what I remember and what I recall, I did not know that we had put an extra layer of magnesium oxide.
Now, you need to be very clear about the difference between saying you definitely didn't agree or you can't remember. Is this a failure of recollection on your part, or are you saying, let me finish the question, that they are giving false evidence, Mr. Evans?
I'm saying that I didn't know that that had happened.
Right. Now I'm going to take that as your evidence today that they are giving false evidence on this point.
Okay.
And if I'm wrong about that, please do correct me. Now, let's move forward. CEL 403093, please. This is a presentation which was done on the 11th of March 2014. Have you seen it before?
Sorry, what was the date?
The 11th of March 2014.
I don't know.
Well, I'll show it to you. It runs to some 17 pages or so, and let's just look at the first few slides and see if they trigger a recollection. Project objective. Objectives: gain BRE 135 approval with Celotex RS 5000 for use in buildings above 18 metres by Q1 2014. And then the next slide, project update, etc. Is this familiar to you?
It looks like the template that would have been given at a spin meeting. That
Right.
first slide
I
reminded
see.
me that it looks like it would be a spin presentation.
And if we go on in it, please, to page 3, you could see that the criteria for BS 84142 testing, you see that, was at level 2, thermocouples do not exceed 600 degrees within 15 minutes. Test duration must be full 30 minutes. Do you remember seeing that?
I don't recall the presentation. When you said the March presentation, that wasn't a presentation that I recalled. Now I know it's a spin
Right.
presentation, but no, I don't necessarily remember this presentation.
I said to you that it was a 17-page document. In fact, it's a 3-page document, not a 17-page document. We'll come to that later on. But you say it was done for a spin.
Yes, that would be the general way a spin would run. Each project manager would give a brief update on their project.
And if you look to page 3, actions for coming month, retesting due mid-April. So did we take it that by the time of this slide meeting, budget had been released for a new test?
I wouldn't know whether budget had been or spend had been fully approved, but it would sound that way. Yes.
Right. And then in that same slide, in the second bullet point, it says improved fire barrier system proposed, meeting with fire barrier manufacturer tomorrow. Do you remember being told that there was an upcoming meeting with a fire barrier manufacturer?
Not that I recall, no.
What was that in relation to? Do you remember?
No, I think based on evidence I've seen since, would have been a meeting with a fire barrier manufacturer.
Right. Well, let's then move on to the May test itself. Can we please go to Mr. Roper's statement, CEL 30010052, please, at page 13. And at paragraph 5.35 of his statement, if we just look at that together, he says there at the foot of the page, the team at Celotex had wanted Patrick Jones to construct the rig for the second test because Paul, Rob and I decided that we did not want to pay for another set of drawings to be created, and Patrick knew the system from the first test. We thought that Patrick could oversee the construction without the need for revised drawings. And then over the page it says, Patrick was instructed by me, brackets, I passed instructions on from Paul and Rob, to build the same system as for the first test with 2 changes, thickening the cladding panel to 12 millimetres and inserting the magnesium oxide board on the fire barrier at level 2 and at the top of the rig. Now, that was his evidence. Do you recall having given Mr. Roper such instructions?
No, I don't.
Do you recall whether Mr. Warren had done so?
I don't know.
And given your answers earlier on, I think you deny that you were aware of the existence of magnesium oxide at the level 2 thermocouples and the top of the rig.
Yes.
So are you saying that Mr. Roper is lying when, in the brackets at the top of page 14, he said, I passed instructions on from Paul and Rob?
What I'm saying is that I know that I didn't know there had been some magnesium oxide board put on level 2.
Well, how can you account for the fact that Mr. Roper's clear recollection, which he confirmed on oath yesterday to the chairman and the panel, was that he did pass those instructions on to Patrick Jones from you and Rob Warren? How can you account for that?
I don't know, only on what I know, and only on the fact that I saw the product launch and I saw the product sell into the market and everything else that's happened since then, and not at any point had I known or recalled at any time the fact that we'd put magnesium oxide boards at the fire barriers.
Now, you say in your statement, paragraph 106 on page 30, that you weren't present at the May test.
No,
Is that right?
I wasn't present at either test.
Right. Now, Mr. Clark, in his statement, he's the BRE, it says at paragraph 174 on page 41 of his statement, at BRE 405768. Let's look at that. He says that you were present. BRE 405768, page 41, paragraph 174. He says in the second line, I'm aware that Paul Evans of Celotex was also involved in the test project at a later date and was present at the second test on 2nd of May 2014, but I cannot recall any specific interaction with him before then. Now, he recalls you as being present at the second test. You say you weren't.
No, I don't believe I was at either test.
Can you account for how it is that Mr. Clark recalls you being there?
I can't, no.
Let's move on to a document after the test. CEL 3010627, please. This is this is Mr. Roper's message to you, dated the 8th of May 2014, about a meeting in CC's office on the 12th of May. You see that?
Yes.
And CC, he told us yesterday, was Craig Chambers.
Yes.
Do you recall receiving this invitation?
I don't recall receiving the invitation.
Do you recall going to a meeting in Craig Chambers' office with John Roper on the 12th of May?
I recall having meetings with Craig and John in Craig's office. I don't recall whether that was on the 12th of May or not.
Very well. Do you recall that in that meeting, regardless of the date, you discussed the recent test?
I don't recall.
Do you remember what the meeting was about?
If it was about above 18 metres, then, and I was there, I can only assume it was about the above 18 metre market and the project.
Now, is it right that as a result of the test and at that meeting you asked Mr. Roper to produce some slides summarising the testing position?
I know from the dates and from what I've seen since that there was a MAG meeting at some point a couple of days afterwards.
Indeed.
Yeah.
CEL 409566. That is the invitation or agenda. I'll wait for it to come up. That is an invitation or agenda for a meeting of MAG, participants, C. Chambers, and various other people, including Rob Warren, P. Evans, and Louise Garlick. Apologies, R. Warren. Date 14th May, start 8:30, end 12:30. And then in item number 3 on the agenda, you can see flat roofing launch plan, review and discussion, above 18 metres, review and discussion, 11:30 start, and the end at 12:30, responsible PE. Do you remember that? Remember receiving that agenda, Mr. Evans?
Not specifically, but
Right.
it would have been common purpose for or common process, for a MAG agenda to come out to people.
Right. Now, Mr. Roper isn't listed as an attendee, and he told us yesterday that he wasn't there. You don't have any reason to think that he was, do you?
Well, I believe that John Roper did come to present that presentation.
All right. Now, let's look at your statement. CEL, or your first statement, CEL 3010058 at page 30, bottom of the page, please, paragraph 110. You say, an MAG meeting took place on 13th and 14th of May for 2014, which I attended. The agenda for the second day of that meeting included at item 3, above 18 metres, review and discussion. And we've seen all that. My initials were listed next to it under the column headed responsible. Mr. Roper emailed a PowerPoint presentation entitled Above 18 Metres to me at 10:46 on 14th of May 2014, when I would already have been in the meeting. Mr. Roper once attended and presented at an MAG meeting, and I believe, over the page, that it was at this meeting that he did so. I do not believe that I presented these slides to the MAG. Now, if we look at CEL 50932, please, we can see that Mr. Roper sends you an email on the 14th of May 2014 at 10:46. Can you see that?
Yes.
And the subject is emailing MAG presentation. And all the message says is, your message is ready to be sent with the following file or link attachments, MAG presentation.
Yes.
Now, at that time, at 10:46, the meeting had already started, but we hadn't yet, or you hadn't yet, got to the agenda item number 3, had you?
Based on those timings, no.
This was about 45 minutes before the above 18-metre review slot, which you were going to run.
Yes.
Yes. Now, do you know why he sent them to you at this time, if it was he who was going to be presenting those slides?
I would imagine because a common practice at the MAG meetings was people would have their laptops available, and if John was only coming in to give a small presentation, he would email it to me, and then I could load it onto the screen that we had in the boardroom.
The most obvious explanation is that he was sending them to you for you to present, or is that not right?
I don't believe that would have happened on the basis that I wouldn't have accepted getting slides to a presentation 45 minutes before I was due to present it.
Did you study these slides when they arrived?
If John presenting them, I wouldn't have done, no.
All right.
I was in the
Let's
middle-
look at the presentation. CEL 3010629, please. And this is the 17-page slideshow.
Okay.
And it's entitled Above 18 Metres. And it's the presentation that you've referred to in your statement, in the paragraph we've just seen. And if we go to slide 11, please, first of all, it's headed Market Research. And it says, everybody uses K15 as there is no alternative. Nobody understands the test requirements. Architects ask if it can be used above 18 metres. Answer is yes, in caps. Building control have hugely differing levels of understanding on the subject. Give us a board that is an alternative to Kingspan and we'll buy it. Is this Mr. Roper's presentation of what he had found through his market research that you had asked him to undertake?
I believe they're the slides that John put together, so they would be his words, yes.
Yes, and you understood that when he was putting that slide together, these were the fruits of his research in the market. And that's all I'm asking you.
Yeah, a very, very brief summary, but yes.
Yeah, it's a summary of the 4 main findings that he's found. I mean, there's no difficulty about that, is there? That's what he found, and that's what you understood him to have found.
Yes.
You didn't have any doubts about it, did you?
Not that I can remember, no.
If we look at the second bullet point down, it says, nobody understands the test requirements. Architects ask if it can be used above 18 metres. The answer is yes. Is that, to your understanding at the time, a summary of what you believed Kingspan were telling people?
I don't know whether that's what we knew Kingspan was saying to all of the architects. Right. I don't know.
Is it fair to say that Celotex, through this slide, if not before, were aware that there was significant uncertainty, even among regulators, if one can call them that, as to what the requirements for use of insulation above 18 metres were?
I believe there was some uncertainty in the market on this particular application, yes.
Yes, and those two, the second and third bullet points really just identify where the confusion and ignorance lay.
Yes.
That's fair, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. And the plan now was, rather than to educate the market and possibly invite a lawsuit from Kingspan, to capitalise on that ignorance or confusion. Is that what one can take from this?
I don't believe that was a decision that we were going to look to capitalise on it. I think we were going to look at what Kingspan did and explain things in a clearer way.
Well, this goes back to the chairman's question. You had tried a representative rig in the February test, and that had failed, and you'd now done the test in May, and it was now to be discussed. In the light of the success of the May test, wasn't the plan now to take advantage of the ignorance and confusion that Mr. Roper had found in the market and was relaying in this slide?
I wouldn't say we were taking advantage, because I believe what we did when we launched was be clearer to the market how we had tested.
Why was it relevant for the MAG meeting to know nobody understands the test requirements, and that architects asked if it could be used above 18 metres? The answer is a capitalised yes. Why was it relevant?
For the MAG to know?
Yes.
For to give everybody in the business an understanding about the application that we were planning to launch.
And why was it relevant to know that building control have hugely differing differing levels of understanding on the subject? Why was that relevant?
To bring everybody up to speed with the research that had been given.
Why was it relevant that there was so much confusion and ignorance and disputation in the marketplace?
John's been asked to put a presentation together, and he's presented what he sees as the market.
And I would suggest to you that this was being put before you so that you could make a decision as to how, and if so, to what extent, to take advantage of it.
My belief is that John was just asked to come and present the above 18 metre market work that had been done on the basis that we had passed the second test.
And the last bullet point, give us a board that is an alternative to Kingspan and we'll buy it, was use as an alternative to K15 and express proposed selling point for RS5000.
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
I'll try it a different way. Was what was being said here the fact that there was hunger in the market for an alternative to Kingspan?
In terms of the market that we would sell into, yes, I believe people would have wanted more than one choice.
So really, what this market research is telling everyone who reads this slideshow, and one can read it very simply, is the market's forced to use Kingspan as there's no alternative. The market would love for there to be a different alternative, and there's mass ignorance out there. All three of those points are reasons to sell RS5000 into the above 18-metre market, aren't they?
I wouldn't have said we were looking at calling it mass ignorance.
Well, nobody understands the test requirements. How would you describe that if not mass ignorance?
I don't know. I think the term "nobody understands the test requirements" is very, looking at the slide again now, nobody understands the test requirements is a big generalisation of the market. I think people did understand.
These are all of them being presented as plus points, reasons to embark on selling RS5000, aren't they?
I don't know what the motive was for John putting those slides together, but...
Well, did you ask him why it was relevant that nobody understands the test requirements or that building control have hugely differing levels of understanding?
No, not at that point.
No, because you understood extremely well that those two middle bullet points were further advantages or further opportunities for RS5000, weren't they?
Based on what we tried to do in our literature, and when we launched the product, we were looking to try and make it clearer to people about how we tested and what people needed to do if they wanted to use the product.
Slide 12, please. Testing part 1. Cost £25,000. System 8mm Eternit cladding, Lamitherm fire barriers, 100mm FR5000, sheathing board, METSEC frame. Result terminated after 25 minutes, flames extending test facility. That's a pithy summary of what happened at the February test. Is there anything in that summary that you weren't aware of when you received this slide?
No, but on the basis that the presentation only came to me whilst I was in the middle of a meeting, I don't think I would have read the slides before they were presented.
All right. You would have read them afterwards, or in the years afterwards, and had a look back at them? I'm asking you now, just looking at it now, is there anything in that slide that you didn't know at the time about the first test?
No.
No. Next slide, please. and that's a photograph of the mode of failure. Do you remember seeing that? It's quite an eye-catching photograph.
Yeah, I recall seeing pictures from the test report.
Yeah. Next slide, please. 14. Testing part 2. Cost £25,000. System, 12 millimetres Eternit cladding. That's different, isn't it, from the 8 millimetres we saw before, yes? And you would have known, as I think you've told us, that the May test involved thicker cladding than the February test.
Yes.
Then it goes on to say Lamitherm fire barriers with 6 millimetre magnesium oxide.
Yes.
So you would have seen from that that the fire barriers, unlike the test in February, had 6 millimetre magnesium oxide added to it.
Yes.
So you saw that. So you did know that the 6 millimetre magnesium oxide was added to the May test.
I knew, looking at that, there would have been information given to me. I didn't know why we'd done it.
I see. So when, I'm just trying to understand your evidence earlier, when I showed you what Mr. Hayes had said. Are you saying that you're now saying you did know that there was a 6 millimetre magnesium oxide added to the second test, or not?
On the basis of that being one slide presented to me now, but I wouldn't have recalled at the time, and I didn't recall, and I would never have known why we were putting that extra magnesium oxide into the system.
Well, now you've moved to a why. I want to know the what. You told us with some strenuousness not half an hour ago, Mr. Evans, that you were not aware at all of a decision to add 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide to the test. Are you now saying that you were aware?
No, at the
as
time,
this slide shows.
At the time of the test, I wasn't aware that we had put 6 mil magnesium oxide into the second tested system. It would appear that this has then been communicated to the MAG, and I haven't. Penny hasn't dropped with me.
We can check the transcript, and I'm sure you said to us earlier that you weren't aware of the addition of a 6 millimetre magnesium oxide board until you saw a picture of it on your phone in 2017.
I'd forgotten it was on this presentation.
I'm sure.
I was trying to think of the other evidence that I'd seen since, with the benefit of having been given evidence provided to me to make my statement.
Mr. Evans, I'm not interested in your trying to piece different pieces of evidence together. What I want from you, please, is the truth, if you don't mind. Now, let's start again. I've shown you the slide. It comes to you on the 14th of May, 2014, in the morning. I've shown you other evidence from other witnesses who have told and are going to tell the inquiry that you knew all along about the 6 millimetre magnesium oxide board. Here is a slide that you saw on the 14th of May, which identifies the addition of the 6 millimetre magnesium oxide board. Now, when did you become aware that the second test involved the addition of a 6 millimetre magnesium oxide board, please?
The only time it resonated with me that we had done something with that was when. So there's this piece of evidence here, and there's the photo of the whiteboard, but both of those bits of information haven't registered with me what we're doing. The only time I realised that what we had done had been a problem was when I saw the evidence, when I found it on my phone sometime in November 2017.
You don't deny, do you, that this slide is telling everybody who cared to look at these slides, of which there was no secret at the MAG level within Celotex, I assume, that in the second test there was present in the fire barriers a 6 millimetre magnesium oxide board.
That is what that slide is saying, yes.
And you knew it at the time, yes?
Only based on looking at it then. I don't recall seeing it at the time or knowing why we had done it.
Was there any discussion at the MAG meeting of the 6 millimetre magnesium oxide board?
I really don't recall. I don't know.
Did you tell the MAG that this, or did Mr. Roper tell the MAG, if it was him, that the 6 millimetre magnesium oxide board was placed at the thermocouples, level 2 in the rig, behind 8 millimetre Eternit Natura, and also at the top of the rig?
I don't believe so.
Did you not point out, or did Mr. Roper not point out the differences between the failed February test and the successful May test?
I don't know. I don't recall.
Did nobody actually ask the question, how come it passed in May and it failed in February?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't recall that question being asked.
Well, it would have been the essence, surely, of the item that you were to present, item 3 in the agenda, the above 18 metre discussion. Surely the only thing to discuss was why the February test had failed and why the May test had succeeded, and where to go from there, no?
I'm sure the conversation happened. I can't recall what the detail of those conversations were.
Mr. Chairman, I'm really halfway through this topic, but it's a convenient moment.
Yes, and I think probably the day has gone on long enough.
Yeah, it has.
The Trevens, we're going to break now for the day.
Okay.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to come back tomorrow for some more questions. And maybe, Mr. Millett, can you give me any indication whether Mr. Evans is going to require the whole day? Or
He won't require the whole day. No, we are optimistic that we will get on to the next witness significantly before the end of the day.
Right, so he might get away at lunchtime or shortly after.
Might do, but I wouldn't want to promise that.
Right. Well, I was just trying to see whether we could help you to make your arrangements for tomorrow. It's a bit indefinite, I'm afraid.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
We'll see how we go. But anyway, I think you will be needed here for the morning at least, and possibly just into the afternoon.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll stop now. Please remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it when you're out of the room. And we'll look forward to seeing you at 10 o'clock tomorrow, please.
Thank you.
All right? Thank you very much. Thank you. 10 o'clock tomorrow then, please.